Thanks everybody for the opportunity to be here today. And Ann and I were talking about this agenda going back a little ways, and we thought, cohesive strategy 101, what does that look like? And since Ann's been involved since really the very beginning of designing and developing the cohesive strategy, we thought we could sort of tag team this. So I hope you're still in for that, Ann.
I definitely am, Kate.
All right, so I'll just briefly give my spiel that I typically give folks when they say, well, where did this come from? And in 2009, Congress passed the Flame Act based on a decade of, well, the Flame Act had a lot of information in it, had a lot of direction in it, but part of the direction was to ask the Departments of Agriculture and the Interior to develop this cohesive strategy to address some of the wildland fire issues that we have across the country. And even then, and going back into late 90s, early 2000s, people were dying. We were losing more and more habitat, more and more acreage. We were spending gobs and gobs and gobs of money. We were losing communities and economies. And so this group, as Ann mentioned, going back quite a ways, was concerned about all of those things that weren't getting any lesser, if that's the right way to say that. They weren't decreasing in intensity, they were increasing. And so they spent 5 years collaborating with a lot of different groups across the nation to pull together, hey, what are your biggest challenges? What are you seeing out there, everybody across the landscape? And when we say that, it's important to note that we're not just talking about the forested landscape, but we're also talking about rangelands. And sometimes that gets, I don't want to say forgotten, but the CNN moments are usually the great big forests on fire. And so rangelands don't maybe get the big press that they should, but are equally as dangerous and equally as devastating and cause the same level of problems that we see in some of the western forests around wildfire. So it's important to note that. And for 5 years, we collected information, we collected challenges and barriers and what were people trying to achieve. And what surfaced from those conversations were these 3 challenges that needed addressing. One being the resiliency of our landscapes needs to be improved. And how do we do that? And then of course, fire adaptation in our communities. And of grave concern at the time and continues to be is what can we do around safe and effective wildfire response? Like I said, people were dying, people continue to die, firefighters, members of the public. And what happened is those became the 3 overarching goals of the cohesive strategy. Those were the 3 biggies. And it was also really important to note that, let's see if I can flip the page here. It was also important to note that there's sound science at the basis for everything that folks were trying to do even back then, but now we've just validated that everything that we try to do, from the national to the regional to the very most local arenas, is really grounded in solid, sound, best available science. And so we had this little graphic made that describes for you, and I hope you can read it. It's a little small on my teeny tiny screen, but this graphic just kind of visually displays that here are these 3 overarching goals. We used to refer to them as 1, 2, and 3, but that sort of made folks wonder, well, is one more important than the other? And it's not. That's just the list that we have. And so it's very important for us to realize that all of these are intertwined. So if you're at the local level and you're working towards projects that are on your landscapes that might be adjacent to your communities, that might affect, of course, how firefighters can defend either homes or actually do work on the landscape, you can see pretty quickly how easily they're intertwined. And I hope that this graphic shows that. And I'm going to stop talking for a second just to see if there's anything Ann wants to add before I keep going.
No, I think, Katie, the only thing I would add is that, if you can read the little diagram on your screens, it really hits home when you read the bottom part of the resilient landscapes. It wasn't, you know, the landscapes should be resilient to fire, but also insect and disease disturbances. You know, clear across the country, we're seeing the forest mortality or problems with, you know, different types of diseases that are affecting, you know, the vegetation, whatever it is. And even with the fires that we had last fall here in Oregon, because of the density of the smoke for numerous days, it changed what the trees, you know, acted like. It was so out of the norm. And it really is going to be important for us to pay attention to changing science. And I know the U.S. Geological Service, they have a new fire strategy that they're, you know, based on science that will be out. And I hope that folks are able to access this type of assessment data in their local areas. If not, you know, we can certainly add some links and information to that in the chat later.
Well, I'm just going to say exactly, and I'll probably say that a lot throughout the day, because there are so many issues at play and so many things that are calling us all to the table. And that is really the beauty of the cohesive strategy, is what is valuable to you, where you live, where you work, in what you do. And the one thing that I hope we walk away with today is the notion that I see myself in the cohesive strategy in a variety of different ways, not just because it's my job, but where I am as an individual, where I live in Oregon, the groups that I participate in. And I hope that NACD and the individual conservation districts, and I love that number, that there's 3,000, almost one in every county. There are opportunities for conservation districts to engage around issues that are important in those areas that ultimately still make meaningful progress towards these goals. So if you're cool, Anne, I'm going to go ahead and bump a page here. And look at all those words. I apologize for that. So if your eyes blur a little bit, it's okay. But I think the one thing that I really wanted to point out today is that the Wildland Fire Leadership Council has been around since about 2002, and Mr. French, as the acting Deputy Undersecretary for Agriculture, Department of Ag, is sitting at this table and representing NRCS there. And as you can see by just the federal members that sit around this table, let me move all those pictures. You can see that there's quite a bit of knowledge, experience, a high level connection at this level. And while WFLC doesn't set policy, we call it that, Wildland Fire Leadership Council, or WFLC, spends a lot of time acting outside of their getting together. There's opportunities for each of the members to act in different circles and help foster and help people understand where we need to be prioritizing our investments, where we need to be looking at other tools in the toolbox to help some of those things along as we're trying to develop ways to better work together for better fire outcomes. And so I just wanted to list here for you the 19 members and where they come from. And you can read those, but I thought it was important to note that there's definitely some representation there at the NRCS level, but it also includes some science. It includes tribal influence, all 5 of the bureaus in the Department of Interior, including Office of Wildland Fire, which is not a separate bureau, U.S. Fire Administration. Whoops.
The Department of Defense was a good one, a recent addition, being that they're like the 7th largest land manager in the country. And they have their own invasive species programs, all sorts of different programs. So it was really important to broaden the original membership of the Wildland Fire Leadership Council to be more inclusive of, you know, the agencies that are managing those lands. And they are a lot of conservation districts have great relationships with the management of the installations and such across the country. I think it makes sense that there's another connection there with districts.
That's right, Ann. When you were mentioning who else, that was one of the actions that WFLIC took a few years ago to really bring DoD into the membership, because that was a huge part that was missing in terms of leadership. So that's been an interesting add-on to WFLIC. They have since, and are working on right now, a cohesive strategy for DoD around their lands. Like you said, there's so many, there's such an influence there landscape-wise.
And Katie, I just got a message from Tom Harbour, who said he had to pop off, but intended to be back, and wanted me to mention the renewed interest that Department of Defense has in engaging the WFLIC and developing a cohesive strategy for DoD lands, but one which fits with the national cohesive strategy.
Without a doubt.
Thank you, Tom Harbour. I appreciate that message, and we'll see you back on here later.
Yeah. So just a quick list of the non-federal members, and you can read those. And then interestingly, when we take a step down a little closer to the ground, there's 3 regions of the Wildland Fire Leadership Council. And initially, I don't want to cut you short on time to read this, but initially our first task was, how can we facilitate implementation of the cohesive strategy? And so we've spent the last better part of a decade working on how do we help people understand what the cohesive strategy is and what does it mean at their level or in their space? Because we do know that the cohesive strategy was created to not be this top-down pressure of here's how we want you to do things, but more of an acknowledgement that from the ground up, this is where things are going to change. And leadership can help at that level to facilitate some of that change. But for the most part, it's not a directive, but more of a, how can we, I'm going to use this a lot, how can we work better together to achieve better fire outcomes? When people say, what's the cohesive strategy? I usually lead with that because that's the simple way. But as you saw just in that graphic, there's a whole lot more to it, and it is very, very intertwined, of course, and rooted in sound science. And you wanted me to mention a little bit about what some of the priorities are. And a couple of these I hope resonate with conservation districts, in particular, anything having to do with resilient landscapes, I think will be important. And that doesn't always mean just federal or state lands. An equal partner in those efforts is private landowners. So I think there's really opportunity there for conservation districts to engage. Of course, reducing risk to communities. Lately, smoke management and the smoke issues around prescribed fire have surfaced. And so that's coming to the foreground now for WFLIC attention. It's not on this list. It's not an official priority for WFLIC, but I think we'll see that emerge here in this next round. You guys mentioned what happens after a fire, what happens after a disaster. And I know Ann's going to talk about that a little bit, but there's opportunity there for us to look at how can we mitigate some of those impacts beforehand. And so how can we use the same collaborative process to look at not just the fire, regardless of where that is or what type of landscape, but what could we be doing pre-fire, during fire, and after fire that can help build those resilient landscapes for the future. We know that fire is going to be an issue in some of our ecosystems, especially in the West. And even though human-caused fires are a great big issue in most places, sometimes there's always, in the West anyway, lightning is a big issue too. And sometimes that's an even split between natural caused fire and human caused fire, depends on where you are. But those give us opportunities to understand that fire will always be a part of what we do. And we can always address those needs around natural fires as well as human caused fires just as equally. I hope that makes sense. I'm kind of floundering there, but I'm trying to make that point. But it comes across in terms of mitigating post-fire impacts. And so in the West, we've been working on that closely with the Western Governors Association, along with the representatives from both private and public agencies.
I'll chime in there, Katie, if that's okay.
Please.
So one of the things that you mentioned, you know, human caused ignitions, one of the things over the last several years, you know, that I've noticed, I have had friends that work on prevention teams that used to go across the country and help out, and they really aren't so much called on anymore. And I think that there's somewhat of a complacency that we have so many fires and they are getting larger that, you know, we just keep throwing money at suppression. And like Chris said early on, you know, we're not getting ahead of this with restoration. We can't keep up. So where I look at this, it's like we do need to have a focus on prevention. And I've seen in my own Clackamas County in Oregon here, and you'll hear about that later in panel 3, where they've done a lot of firewise or prevention efforts to try to reduce the number of fires. So I think even in those little steps and things that the districts do locally on where we can have, you know, a role, I think is really important. And I think you nailed it, Katie, with talking about how, you know, post-fire is really when people think about conservation districts and their connection with EQIP or funds with NRCS. But they don't think about engaging conservation districts early in the preparedness or planning stages of it. And I hope that changes. I hope that this summit helps to change that.
I think those are good statements. I'm not watching the chat, Anne, so if there's something that comes in there that we need to address, just jump in. The one thing that when I was talking about what I was getting at a minute ago was, how do we live with wildland fire? And that's the very core of the vision for the cohesive strategy, which is to safely and effectively put fires out when we need to, use fire when we can, right place, right time, all of that, and make sure that we're managing our natural resources based on sound science. And this is just off the cuff. It's a little more tight than this, but then the last statement is, as a nation, live with wildland fire. So if we can't get rid of fire, which we know we can't, then how do we live with fire? How do we learn to live with wildland fire? And that looks different everywhere, no matter where you are. It's a little bit different in the Midwest, in the Southeast, Northeast, of course, and you guys are going to learn more about that with the other summits. But I threw up a map here to give you some idea of the regions that WFLIC has originally put in place around the cohesive strategy, but now we find ourselves working more on those priorities that we talked about a minute ago, because we've done, well, like I said, about a decade of helping people understand what the cohesive strategy is and what it looks like at their level. And now we act more as facilitators of, how can we help you individually, or you, a group of people or an organization, really embrace the cohesive strategy and put it to work for you where you are facing the wildfire challenges, the wildland fire challenges that you have. So this is just a quick map. As you can see by the light teal color, that's our region in the West. We've got everything from Alaska to Nebraska, including the islands, the Pacific Islands. And then you can see the other two regions, Southeast and kind of the Northeast, Midwest area. Anything you want to add to that, Anne?
I think that's good. I'm glad that you showed the map on that, because they are definitely different districts and different regions, and it gets very confusing. And when that FEMA also has different regions,
it's fun.
You know, it makes, you know, when you're looking at disaster, you know, preparedness and recovery, finding funds to pay for these projects and pay for what we're asking, you know, for districts to engage in, you know, matters, and what district you're in, and there'll be more information about that later on today. But I'm also working on drafting a desk guide for conservation districts to help with understanding and implementing cohesive strategy that'll have these maps of the different regions and different agencies. So
you bet. What I liked in my homework around conservation districts is that there's one key focus, but everybody is focusing on what matters to them in their place. Resource conservation district, soil and water conservation district, and I think as you hear from the different folks in the different summits, you'll see how well they play together and where some of the gaps still are, and how everybody can better engage and, again, work better together. I use that a lot.
That sounds good. And I've got 2 questions in the chat already. So
okay, go ahead.
7 minutes left.
If you could read them, that'd be great. I don't have them up on my screen.
No problem. Kate, are you aware of the joint WIFLC National Invasive Species Council initiative to explore more effective co-management of fire and invasive species, mainly annual grasses? If so, do you have any update on that and its potential relevance to this group? Thank you, Jeff Morissette, for that question.
Thank you. Yes, I am aware of it. And the executive director for WIFLC is very engaged with that opportunity around co-management of risk. And it's one of the key principles of the cohesive strategy is how do we, and can we find better ways to not just contribute and collectively invest, but how can we collectively and as partners co-manage risk and co-manage some of these collective investments, I guess is how I'm going to say that. And that is one really good example of that. But I don't have an update on that for you today, but I certainly could get one. And maybe before the end of the day, I could provide that for you before we're done here today. I will talk to Mike Zupko, and his contact information will be here at the end. So I'll make sure you get that.
That sounds good. The second question from Lori Tippin is, where does home hardening fit into the cohesive strategy, and what level of focus or priority does home hardening receive?
Huge. To be frank, the goal of fire adapted communities embraces a lot of different types of work, one of which is at the homeowner scale, and looks at ways within National Fire Protection Association, their FireWise program, which focuses now even more so on home hardening. Those are ways that individuals can participate in helping to advance those goals, and how those are ways for neighborhood groups and local organizations to convene around those particular issues at a very, very small scale by comparison to a 1,000,000-acre landscape. But it really does, when we talk about the cohesive strategy and we say, not only can we not do it alone anymore, no one organization or agency can do it alone, likewise, or conversely, it's going to take everybody. So there are places for everyone to engage around the goals of the cohesive strategy, and that's one of those ways. Home hardening, any sort of preparedness at the neighborhood or very local individual level. Evacuation planning is really surfacing as another high priority for education and prevention. As Ann mentioned, if you're ready and set, what are you waiting for? Because we know we're going to deal with fire. We know that resources, which has emerged as an even a bigger issue than it was 10, 15 years ago when this was being developed, resources, if fire is a year-round problem now, that means getting the resources that we need to address those fires are also a bigger issue. And so like come August, come July, August, September, when everybody's been fighting fire since April and everybody's still out on fires, the question of evacuation comes up around, well, do I wait for someone to tell me to go, or do I just go? And the answer is, you got to just go. So those are the types of education things that we're seeing surface. And home hardening, of course, with the onset of more fires that are getting into WUI fires, wildland urban interface fires, that are actually really just mowing down communities, and there's no opportunity for defending a home. And fire departments in those type of fires are engaged in an evacuation effort. When there's a point where things change and suddenly law enforcement is needing help getting people out. And so with life safety being the #1 priority for pretty much any fire agency on the planet, the priority switches to how do we get people out, how do we save people, as opposed to how do we protect your home, which falls right behind it in the priority list. But there's a breaking point there when fires are in a community that's, you know, a fast wind driven fire that you can't get ahead of. Evacuation is now surfacing as one of those issues, a little more so. But to get back to your question, yes, home hardening is a part of that picture and fits squarely within that fire adapted communities effort.
Sounds good, Katie. I really appreciate what you say to that. And, you know, in helping folks understand evacuation, you know, I watched several times where people sit on their porch and they'll wait for a fire truck or a sheriff's deputy to come by to tell them it's time to go. When they're overwhelmed, they're not going to show up. And in the original call to action that we did back in 2008, 2009, when we were first trying to pull together this concept of a cohesive strategy where everybody would come together, it said right on it that we are at a point in this country where we as fire service are not going to be able to help everybody. And so you have a personal responsibility to harden your home or to do defensible space. Be cognizant of cleaning out your gutters. If you're in a rental and you don't have, you know, the responsibility or authority to do those things, you have to take steps to try to work with your land, you know, the manager and fix that. With that, we have just a minute so left, and there was one more slide you had that I really wanted to try to, you know, how can districts really engage with cohesive strategy? And that's it. The Firewise, the Joint Chiefs.
Yep.
Thank you for putting that up.
We've touched on a lot of those today, and I think everybody who has spoke before me has even talked about some of these. So these are just a few of the ways. And what I really like best about conservation districts is, like I said before, they really reflect the place-based issues that are going on in that district. And so the more local you can engage, I think the better. The more understanding, the more that those local cultures start to shift to things. That's a really great example, to things of, you know, we've been sort of placated over the years to think that there's a fire truck that's going to come when something happens. And the hard truth of that is there are instances, and more instances lately, where that can't happen. So we as fire professionals and education professionals need to start shifting that culture of understanding in our communities. That's just one example, of course, but there's a lot of different ways for folks to engage. And here's a short list. And as always, you know, my job is to help connect some of those dots so we can continue to have this conversation, if you like. And I'm just going to leave this there.
That sounds good. And we have some great comments in the chat. And if you
to me, especially if they say good things, tell me.
well, they do. And unfortunately, though, we are out of time and we need to turn it over to panel 1 and to our showcase host, Wyoming. But I definitely want to say thank you to you, Katie. Great presentation. Thanks for letting me tag team it with you. I know that we've gone through a lot of this and the plan development and the comments in there in the chat. I definitely take a minute and try to respond to those if you can. Ellen, I really appreciate your comment in here about land use and American Planning Association. That's spot on with FEMA's building science program and such. And the same with Doug Rushton. And you know, you're exactly right. Communications, poor broadband or when the cells are down because the power's out or such, I saw it. People got their information from Facebook on their phone, not an emergency management system, or website. But and Sarah, thank you too for your comments, and Danielle. There's a bunch of links with great information in there. Please, please, please access those and follow up with them. And with that, I will turn it over to Hunter, who is our moderator for the next panel.
Thanks, Ann.
Thanks, Ann. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm glad to be here. My name is Hunter Petch, and I am the Executive Director for the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. I certainly wish we could have done this in person, but I look forward to meeting many of you here in the future as things are starting to look up a little bit. A little background about me and what I do. Our association represents the 34 conservation districts throughout the state of Wyoming. I grew up on a farm and ranch in southeastern Wyoming, so land stewardship and protecting our natural resources is near and dear to my heart. Fortunately for me, I wasn't around a lot of wildfires, so I'm very interested and excited to moderate this panel. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mike Henn.
Thanks, Hunter. Gonna bring up my presentation. All righty. Well, I just wanted to tell everybody or tell the story of how how Sublette County Conservation District and our partners within our county have dealt with catastrophic wildfire in the past. So I'll breeze through this, and then I have a few of the partners on the panel that will elaborate where I left off. So
hey, Mike, can I stop you for a second?
Yeah.
PowerPoint is showing your PowerPoint and notes.
Oh, okay. This worked the other day. Is it still showing the notes?
No, we can see your full PowerPoint now.
Okay, so we're good to go. All righty. So let me go back here. So since 2012, we've had 3 large wildfires within our county and adjacent counties on mixed ownership. Like people have said, the fire doesn't stop at the fence. So I'll quickly go through these 3 fires and how our group has slowly improved and gotten better with our planning and then pre-planning as well as response after fires. So in 2012, we had the Fontenelle fire start. Everybody knows in the Intermountain West, 2012 was a very dry year, and especially in Wyoming, we had a large fire season statewide. Only seeing the first slide. Okay, well, this is just not working. So we're going to adapt. All righty, so we'll just do it this way. You'll get to see everything. So it was a 47,000 acre fire, burned on multiple ownerships, both forest, BLM, private, and state. And the group was able to respond to this with about $850,000 worth of funding to help with the restoration and recovery effort of this fire that burned across several ownerships. So the timeline you can see here, the fire started very early for fires in Sublette County. Our fire season is generally not until August, but this started in June. The partners engaged as the flames started to die and started having conversations with landowners, land managers, how can we help? make this a larger effort and not be a burden to any one agency or landowner or individual. So we started the grant writing process the fall and winter of 2012, and we started implementing practices in the summer of 13 and 14 with aggressive weed treatments where we knew weeds previously existed, plus looking at new or spread of those infestations. Hired riders to help ensure if a pasture didn't burn in its entirety or an allotment, you know, trying to still utilize areas that were not affected to help mitigate those efforts for livestock. We also did a lot of fundraising to help with off-site grazing. We worked with the Forest Service and others to use vacant allotments to relocate, or in a lot of cases in this fire, we paid for off or private land grazing to help those producers for those several years of rest. And because it burned across multiple ownerships, we had a lot of fence reconstruction, boundary fences along allotments, boundary fences between BLM and forest and private and state that we had to deal with, getting those reconstructed before livestock could return to the landscape. And we also set off with a very aggressive monitoring effort, set goals and objectives moving forward to make sure we have proper recovery. And then the long-term goal is we've been combating weeds, still going on. This is 2018 was when the funding ran out, but since then we've chased additional funding to help with that. This is not going to show well, but this is some recovery of one area, one riparian area. You can see 2 years post-fire, willows coming into this creek bottom, as well as good vegetation on the hillsides above. And these are the partners that helped come into this. Like I said, it wasn't one group or one agency. We partnered together to help make this a larger effort, and it was successful. The next one that occurred was the Cliff Creek fire. This is a smaller fire, burned primarily on Forest Service property, and it also burned just a little bit on private, but like I said, the majority was on forest. We built upon the experience we learned at the Fontenelle fire, and because it was primarily burned on 2 grazing allotments, the need for fundraising was a lot smaller, so we were awarded $67,000 roughly to help with the efforts after this fire. So this was a July fire, a little more normal, lightning caused fire. In July, we started having conversations between the partners and the funding entities to help expedite. We learned we were a little behind the 8 ball on the Fontenelle, so we got out in front and we're starting to have conversations and meetings as the fire was burning and then moving into that fall. In 17 and 18, the 2 years of post-fire rest and recovery, we did some fence construction. As you can see in this picture, we used some high tensile electric fence, a 1-wire fence, did the continuation of the weed treatments. And because of this fence, it was a drift fence, we were able to use riders to control livestock movement off of this fence and also to help with weed surveys throughout the fire area. You can see here, year 1, fairly decent recovery in the understory. This was, you know, a good spring for us, a good snowpack. And then year 2, you can see here, all this gold in this herbaceous understory is aspen regenerating in these aspen stands. And so we had a good recovery effort there. The partners obviously were a little smaller, as you can see, but it was still a very successful effort. Moving into 2018, this was one of the largest, the larger of the 3 fires. You can see we got awarded $1.6 million, and third time is the charm, the group kind of used as the motto. Unique to this fire, it did burn through a rural subdivision. So this was a WUI interface. And we lost 55 homes, the largest home loss within Sublette County due to wildfire. We had the road infrastructure impacted to this subdivision, and we added new teams to the party. We had large community outreach due to so many affected landowners. We had open houses, follow-up meetings a year after the fire to make sure we were still helping them, and we did individual assessments for those subdivision landowners to help them with recovery and revegetation as needed. So this fire was a late fire. It was freezing and snowing while the fire was burning. It goes to the third time the charm. The first day of the fire, we were moving along, and you can see here we got funding in place in 2018, and we did the same treatments. We did add some riders. We noticed some concerns with the vacant allotment we were using, so we added riders through our grant funding. You can see here the recovery the first year and the second year on the same photo that we did. This
Hi,
fire
Mike.
also,
You have about 30 seconds if you want to wrap up.
all righty, we're getting close. Yes, so this fire I did want to highlight, we were able to use an EWP grant through NRCS to help with that road infrastructure. And you can see here the partner list grew tremendously. And we're still adding to it. So this is a list of all the people that we've used for all these three fires. You'll see we thought outside of the box on a lot of them. And that was successful in getting our fundraisers. So I will skip to this take home. And basically, I cannot say enough about planning, and there's no I in team. So with that, I will turn it back over to Hunter. This is how we do it. I will say that we have shifted our effort with a Forest Collaborative to do the pre-planning, because it's a lot cheaper to pre-plan than it is to deal with the restoration and recovery. So thanks a lot, Hunter.
Thank you, Mike. I do have a quick question for you before I turn it over to Rob. Were any of tribal entities on those fires?
Tribal entities, we did have BIA resources on the fire. Sublette County does not have any BIA property within it, so no tribes were affected by the actual fires, but they were involved with suppression efforts as a collaborative, as a national partner.
Great, thanks, Mike. Rob, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Hunter. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Appreciate it. Thanks to you. Thanks to Ann also. Looks like I've got the benefit of not speaking right after lunch, but also have a following up from a great presentation from Mike Henn. So I guess one thank you to Ann, and then one tough act to follow here. So through this presentation, would like to provide some insight into how a conservation district and its local wildfire coordinating group is helping to accelerate the implementation of the national cohesive strategy. And we hope to provide examples at a very local level from boots on the ground on what steps we're taking to work with partners in this endeavor. And mainly we're going to look at it from a prevention viewpoint, whereas Mike provided a lot of post-fire response actions that are taking place. So again, focusing on those cohesive strategy goals of fire adapted communities and resilient landscapes. So here's an introduction to the Teton Area Wildfire Protection Coalition, Topback. This is a group consisting of federal landowners and federal fire managers, including Grand Teton National Park, Bridger Teton Forest National Elk Refuge, as well as the Wyoming State Forestry Division, our local fire district, the Jacksonville Fire EMS, industry, including foresters, arborists, insurance brokers, non-governmental organizations such as the Nature Conservancy, citizens, and owners of wildfire businesses. So this coalition formed in 2004, and the formation followed several wildfire seasons where the value of interagency fire efforts was proven, bringing together multiple disciplines and technical experts and resources to create more of a holistic approach to wildfire issues. Some of those key fire years were the 1988 Yellowstone fires, 1996, 2001, that spurred the formation of this group. So the main functions of this group, 4 things. I'll describe those and try to provide an example of each. One is to provide a comprehensive approach to community wildfire protection by educating citizens about steps to mitigate wildfire. This is heavily supported by our Education and Outreach Committee. Providing technical review of fuel reduction projects, such as Wyoming State Forestry Division Community Protection Program grants. And in these cases, Topback is an advisor to decision makers as to whether or not to support these grant requests. Providing long-range wildfire planning and assessment. So in that case, really means developing and revising our community wildfire protection plan, and then facilitating funding opportunities for fuels management and prevention projects. So this group is simply a coalition. There's no tax exempt status. Group has no bank account or even budget. Meet every 2 months except during the summer fire season. And we're in an area with mixed ownership, and I think it's key to point out that the cooperation amongst those many land jurisdictions has been essential. So where does Teton Conservation District fit in with Topback? Well, around 2012, Topback applied for a Western States Wildland Urban Interface grant, and the purpose of that grant was to develop a program with staff to offer wildfire risk overviews for private landowners and to provide a funding source to offset the costs of that fuels reduction work that's recommended as part of those overviews. So what I think is notable here is that Topback actually approached the Conservation District to take on the role of administering that grant. And I think the Conservation District was seen as having strong relationships with private landowners, having experience with technical assistance and cost share programs. And in addition, we're a non-regulatory agency, and that position can make our work easier with landowners that are inviting us to their property to have a conversation. So now I'd like to outline what the program looks like that was born out of that grant and the request from Topback for our conservation district to lead that. We're calling it our Wildfire Risk Reduction Program. The services that we offer, essentially we offer site visit at the landowner's property with the landowner. And we take time to make sure to understand their story, hear their interests and values. And those can vary from wildlife habitat to screening roads and neighbors, interest in native plants. Perhaps they've made large investments in landscaping. One story I remember is working with a landowner who had put to rest a family member under a nondescript tree, and was glad that they were asked just if any trees had special value before we took out flagging tape and started marking trees for removal. This process is typically anywhere between 2 hours and a day, depending on if we're going through and marking timber for removal. So then after hearing landowners' interests, we introduced wildfire risk reduction concepts such as the National Fire Protection Association standards and the best available science that we have, and work to gauge their receptivity to that. So as a follow-up, within a couple days, that landowner will receive a written document, that wildfire risk overview, and that consists of narrative, photos with annotations and diagrams demonstrating concepts. And one key thing we've done is this program has really continuously evolved and hopefully improved over time, has kind of gone from handwritten notes to developing with an agency in the state here, AgTerra, developing software in electronic form so we can fill this information out on a tablet. It's been a huge increase in efficiency for us, allowing us to do more of this work. And then we work with the landowner to follow up on their specific needs. They may need help with how do we find an industry member to implement this work you've recommended? Or if they're doing the work themselves, how do you make a proper pruning cut for limbs on a tree? Another common example is just how do we work with our adjacent neighbor, whether that's common space or private landowner or public land that's within our home ignition zone, but still ideally should be managed to protect our values. And then if landowners implement the recommendations we provide, we offer one-time cost share support of up to $3,000 per landowner for that vegetation management component. Not for the home hardening, but just for that vegetation management work. So I'd like to take a second now and look at just some figures. I'm going to share screen here. Okay. So keep in mind, this is just a very small scale of kind of outputs or work completed, just one district, but just want to ground us all in just some figures of what's actually taking place. This first gray bar chart shows a quantity of wildfire risk overviews that we've completed each calendar year between the years 2013 and 2020. So this is where we met on site with the landowner, provided fire-wise type recommendations, and gave them a written report. Gone from, say, roughly 5, 10, 20 a year to upwards of 60 to 100 per year. I'm going to scroll now to the second bar chart, yellow and green bars that you're seeing here. What this is showing is projects that we've documented as being fully or partially completed by those same landowners. So some of these projects, the landowner completed all of the work that we recommended. Those are green, some partially completed, yellow. Both were eligible for financial support. And just some examples of really what is that type of work. Removing standing dead trees, thinning live trees, pruning limbs away from roof and wall surfaces, removal of dead and down material, and then improving road and driveway corridor spacing. Generally, these trends are showing an increased interest from landowners in these services. And we've shifted from having to really intensively recruit participants in this program to the point now where we're really limiting marketing of the program just due to our capacity. You start to see spikes around the year 2017, 2018, and I think part of that is from what Mike mentioned of that Roosevelt fire in 2018 that hit home with us, where over 50 structures were lost, as well as media coverage of fires, particularly on the Pacific Coast in California, 2017, 2018. I think brought about some.
You want to start kind of wrapping up?
Wrap it up. Thank you. Okay. So some takeaways. It took time and patience to establish an effective program here. It's felt like this has been an emerging profession based on just the diversity of type of folks engaged in this work, whether it's educators, structural or wildland firefighters. So did have a little more information on Topback's kind of future in activities and vision, working with the Wildfire Research Center for building evidence-based programs. We're currently working on hiring a wildfire prevention specialist at the Jacksonville Fire EMS level. We're in the process of managing and applying for a grant to revise our community wildfire protection plan. And we have an active ambassador program where we're working to capitalize on the leadership qualities of landowners who are willing to look at the conditions in their neighborhoods and ways to reduce risk from wildfire in those areas. So thank you, Hunter.
Rob. We really appreciate hearing from you. I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions. We'll go ahead and turn it over to Kathy.
Good morning, and thank you, Rob, for being such a partner in Teton County. Teton Conservation District is one of the stronger partners in wildland fire education and risk reduction. So we really do appreciate your leadership and your partnership. Hunter, being respectful of the time that I have, if you just give me a thumbs up, I'll start wrapping up as well. So I want to talk to you about the fire service in wildland fire. We live right in the wildland urban interface here. We have 2 full-time staffed stations in Teton County. And in the summertime when we're busy, that's 4 firefighters per station, a total of 8 people, which isn't a lot in a wildland fire. Fortunately, we have a combination department, so we do have volunteers
that back us up as well. But the fire service, and I think I can speak on a national as well as a local level, is in an evolution, recognizing that wildland fire doesn't look a bit like structure fire. And we're all very trained and very used to putting on our bunker gear and making a fast attack to a structure fire. We need to rethink that. Teton County has insanely high values. They are insane. Many of you are aware that the land prices in the West have skyrocketed, especially here. So our high value risks drive us to make decisions as well. And of course, we're seeing quite a few insurance engines show up on our fires. Another challenge in the incident command system to be able to work them in and keep everyone safe. This is a low frequency, we hope, high risk event. I would like to keep it low frequency, although this number worries me and all of you as well, of course. It also involves our brothers and sisters in law enforcement, and we need to be very mindful that they are probably out ahead of us going on one-way roads that could be quite hazardous for them as well. They don't have the training that we have to recognize that a road could be burning over and may trap them in a wildland fire scenario, and they certainly aren't carrying shelters with them. So I think that's an important consideration as we start to prepare ourselves for working together in those partnerships for response, wildland fire response. We need to work on training our crews to evaluate risk in the wildland fire scenario, probably a little more carefully. We tend to want to be the heroes and put stuff out, right? And sometimes we need to stand back and evaluate what the fire is doing. We all hope that we have time to prepare the homes that are in the way and the path of the fire, but we may not have that time with a lightning strike especially, or any kind of fire, and a wind-driven fire. For Deputy French, I would recommend and offer that our homeowners are the ones that need to come to the table more. They are the ones that are impacted. They are the ones that need to know how to evacuate. They're the ones that are going to be affected when we can't get in to respond to a wildland fire because conditions are so intense. They need to understand that we're not going to commit suicide to save a house. So we're going to do our best to get them out of there. And we need to work locally and nationally on better evacuation plans and educating that public on what Ready, Set, Go means. I'd like to share a few of our successes. We've just finished up and we're working, actually we didn't finish up, we're still working today on some prescribed burns locally here. They've been big prescribed fires with lots of smoke, and our public gets it, they understand. So I'm really excited that we seem to have educated enough people. They're calling, they're worried, but then when they hear it's a controlled prescribed burn, they're happy about it. We have adopted and have been enforcing the Wildland Urban Interface well since 2012. And just this year, through the support and help, including the Conservation District, we were able to strike woodshake shingles out of the Wildland Urban Interface mapped area. So that's a plus. This year alone, we have reviewed 90 Wildland Urban Interface plans for homes going in the Wildland Urban Interface. That's huge growth in our Wildland Urban Interface, and it will affect us now and in the future. We have the Ambassador Program. Rob talked about that. Okay, I'm getting close, and I am close too. We've got Nixle. We've got 13,867 people signed up for Nixle alerts, as well as wireless emergency alerts and sirens. We need data. I really want to push for NIST, supporting getting NIST out there and doing these works. They just did a review of the campfire. It was a fabulous review. They're important partners in this effort on a national basis. Insurance is going to drive people to make decisions, better decisions. And then we need more people. Capacity is what's going to be our biggest Achilles heel in government agencies and response for wildland fire. With that, thank you so much. I look forward to the rest of the day.
Thank you, Kathy. You did perfect on time. We'll go ahead and turn it over to Barry.
Good morning. I don't promise to do as well on time as Kathy, so you might have to give me a little reminder. My name is Barry Ty. I'm the District Forester for Wyoming State Forestry District in District 4, which is pretty much the western quarter of Wyoming. Just figured I'd give a brief overview of what exactly we do and what I think we can bring to the table with cohesive strategy, and then how the conservation districts help us. So in Wyoming and most states, state forestry is usually a fairly small organization. We have in Wyoming 11 full-time field foresters for the entire state, which are myself and my assistant up in Pinedale over here. So we have 5 large counties that we cover that include urban forestry, rural forestry assistance, fuels mitigation, forest health trapping, the wildfire response. We also do the cooperative fire agreements for every year for the annual operating plans. We have a lot of ground to cover, a lot of programs to administer, and we can offer technical expertise on forestry and fuels projects. We can bring in some funding. We can design and administer all kinds of projects. What we don't have is a lot of boots on the ground. So having partners in the conservation districts is a big help to, one, direct us to landowners who may want to do work, or just provide that local knowledge of areas that are in need of work. Yeah, I've worked extensively with Mike and Rob in Teton and Sublette County. We're on the Teton Area Wildfire Protection Coalition as well as the Sublette Forest Collaborative. But there's, in addition to that, we have Alpine Area Wildfire Protection Coalition down in Lincoln County that we started up 2 years ago, and the Grays River Forest Collaborative. So I have 5 coalitions or collaboratives that I'm on, and with that, I don't have time to really go around and look at all this stuff on the ground all the time. So I depend on Mike and Rob, and then Kaylin Neal down in Star Valley is a big help with the Alpine area. And so I think as you're looking at the cohesive strategy and the things that we're looking to do, where y'all really fit in is providing that local knowledge, and then sometimes it's getting funding. Like Mike said, he's done a lot of good work on Joint Chiefs funding and post-fire recovery. Or with Rob, he goes around and does the home assessments, which, with 2 people, we're not going to get that done in any kind of timely manner. So having Rob out there, and then his local knowledge of what homes are mitigated and which ones need work, which neighborhoods are in pretty good shape and which aren't, that helps myself and Kathy with fire response and designing projects. So, just to touch on some of the things that come out of that, up in Teton County, given Rob's input and some input from other stakeholders, we applied for a CPPG grant to do work on 20, I believe it's about 28 landowners, 180 acres of property up in the Fish Creek area. And that's in the process. It ties into a National Forest Fuels break on the Bridge of Teton. So that's a cross-boundary landscape scale project that's come out of the cooperation between Teton County Conservation District and ourselves. And then with Mike down in Sublette County, we have a Good Neighbor project we're doing on the Bridge of Teton Forest that came out of the Sublette Collaborative meetings last year, and looking at the revising the CWPP and working with some other landowners. So really, we can't do our job without y'all and the things you put in. So thank y'all for that. I'm good.
Thank you so much, Barry. We really appreciate you coming and talking with us. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jill.
Hi, I'm Jill Randall with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, and I'm going to kind of shift back a little bit, talking about the successes that Mike highlighted that we've had in Sublette County with the large-scale wildfires, as will the next couple presenters. So I think from the game and fish perspective, of course, we are prioritizing wildlife habitat. And when you're talking about response to a wildfire, there's very easy common ground to find between multiple resources that are out there. Livestock and wildlife primarily are using the same values on the landscape, which are healthy, productive, forage quality and, good native communities. And so that's kind of that common ground that I encourage you guys to try to find with your stakeholders if you're dealing with wildfire response. Finding those places where you can kind of get everyone on the same page and move in the same direction is going to greatly amplify your effects on the ground. And we've been very successful at doing that exact strategy with different landowners, different livestock permittees, and really all agreeing that we're trying to accomplish the same thing on the ground. I guess I encourage you to look for creative solutions. There's not one way to be successful after a large wildfire. As Mike talked about, we had a lot of different landowners involved, different circumstances with the position of these fires. And so thinking unique to each exact, I guess each project is, I think, a successful way to approach it, not doing exactly what you did last time, but really finding what works on the ground for each project. You know, these wildfires are, I kind of like to say they're a prescribed action, but just on crack. They speed up the time frame, and which can be great, but it also can be a challenge. You know, you don't have NEPA, but you also have to try to put all of the things that you would do through the NEPA and analysis process. You need to move through that very quickly with your stakeholders and all of your partners, and try to mitigate any of those impacts the same way that you would for prescribed action. So going in and really trying to deal with the different resources that are at hand. I mean, recreation and sedimentation, fisheries, you know, looking at through the whole gamut of things that might not even necessarily seem very obvious, but really trying to bring those players, those resources and those concerns to the table when we're coming up with solutions. And as Mike kind of hit on, you know, really utilize the whole team. We have a great group of people here that have a lot of different strengths. You know, some people know the permittees very well. Some people know the landowners very well. Some people are great at getting grant money. Some people, you know, understand how to work through permitting processes. And so really not bringing an ego to the table, but using the strength of everybody on the team to move the whole ball forward. And then of course, you know, you take credit as a team also, and that helps build trust and build those relationships that will really help you with the next time you have a project to deal with. And I guess the last thing I wanted to mention quickly, we've really experienced a lot of success after these wildfires with the relationships we've built during the crisis mode. And we've worked with some of the livestock permittees, for example, during this, you know, urgent wildfire response timeframe. And then a year or two down the road, we go and talk to them about a different prescribed action that we want to do on their property, whether it be go in to treat weeds, go and do some fence modifications, a different veg treatment, something like that. And because we've built a relationship and trust with those entities, it's really easy to continue that and move toward doing other proactive management on the ground. And then really those people, like a lot of places, will talk to their neighbors and said, oh yeah, it's not too bad to work with those government guys. They'll actually do what they say they do, and they'll have your back and get things done. So those have been really great benefits that we've experienced with our team here in Sublette County. With that, I'll let you move on to the next.
Thanks, Jill. We'll turn it over to Julie.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Julie Kraft. I'm a supervisor for Sublette County Weed and Pest here in Pinedale, Wyoming, and am charged with, you know, dealing with invasive species at the county level and working with our partners in as many cooperative ways as possible to minimize invasive species on the landscape and care for our natural resources. And in engaging with our group, our fire response group, and it was really important for us to, when these fires were happening or when we first saw the first smoke plume, looking at our data and figuring out what we knew about those areas. And we started with, you know, kind of a presence absence, really going back into history, looking at all of our data in those cases and attacking those infestations that we knew were in those areas. And we did that on Fontenelle, the first example that Mike gave to you, within weeks after the fire was extinguished, which gave us a great rapport. We went into private land and did those treatments. We really tried to get in there as quick as we can, knowing that was a midsummer fire, and I think that benefited a lot for the years to come. Going back to the example of Roosevelt, I think one of the things that we haven't talked a lot about was the benefit of our collaborative just to the human aspect of things. So I want to touch on that a little bit. And so county weed and pests in Wyoming are funded with county mill levy money. So we're locally funded, and my board contributed $10,000 of county mill levy money for 3 years, so 30,000 total, to treat the weeds within the subdivision that had incurred so much damage. And we did this in addition to the funding that the fire response money that we got through Bayer and with the Forest Service, as well as the BLM funds that came in for the lands that were burned on their jurisdiction. And that really helped us kind of pull a cohesive plan together. It allowed us to explain to the landowners that were very concerned, some of them had devastating loss, that we were there to help them and try to, even if it was just for weeds, we were there. We had crew in the area. We had crew in that part of the fire every day that summer. And so just seeing the presence of people being there and trying to help as a member of our collaborative group, I think was very positive. One thing to think of is, as kind of in the after process or while the fire is going on, in pulling all of your partners, people that you might not traditionally think of as far as a fire. That might be your weed and pest districts or other groups that deal with invasives in your area. And it's important twofold for them to be able to have a voice of maybe if you're going to have a seeding plan, making sure that prevention mechanisms are happening, washing equipment, and when firefighters come into areas, as these big fires brought resources from all over the country in. And that was one of the things that we really tried to do, is to start there. It helped us gain a lot of partners. It helped us secure funding, because most of that fire resource money for federal land is only good for the first year after the fire. And then we had to secure the rest of the money for the weed treatments that are still ongoing in these areas. As many of you know, invasive species have really no silver bullet, or a continuous project for us. So back to that human element, I think by offering help, really helped teach those landowners that really bought kind of their little slice of heaven for their retirement or a place to live out of a town, about natural resources and fire recovery and how well things can really recover, and that we were there to help as resource professionals at all levels of the federal government. We had, as Mike mentioned, we had open houses while the fire was being extinguished. We just really extended ourselves to help them with their personal problem with the resources on their land. And that included after the first year, I think it was pretty interesting. We had an on-site, we all met in a parking lot up in the subdivision, and people could come and talk to us. And one of the comments that we got the most was, thank you for our help. And that they were amazed at how well the landscape recovered. They thought it was just going to be black ash for years. And we were able to talk to them about those things and explain to them how important that Mother Nature can recover and natural resources can kind of recover from that. So I think that it has led to us learning about future projects and being able to pull that in as we manage resources in our local area. That's all I have for you today.
Thank you so much, Julie. We'll go ahead and turn it over to Chad.
Good morning, Hunter. Can you hear me all right? Okay.
I can. Thank you for joining us.
You bet. So I'm Chad Hayward. I work for the Forest Service on the Bridger Teton in range management. I have for over 20 years. And I can't say enough about how important the relationships are in the fire recovery effort. The wildfire will impact your community at some point. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to build those relationships so that you're prepared to respond appropriately when the fire starts or after it's out. And the team that we have in Sublette County is an amazing group of natural resource specialists that really not only care about the resource, but we care about the people that depend on the natural resources. And that has been our motivating, our driver for our motivation behind the whole restoration effort. And we could not have done what we did with the recovery on the Roosevelt and the Fontenelle and the Cliff Creek without our partners at the Sublette County Conservation District. You know, we write grants, and we had, like Jill said, you know, we have people that are really good at writing grants and bringing money in, but there are a lot of restrictions as a federal entity with what I can do with grant monies when they come in. And in several instances, we had to purchase private forage for livestock that we were requesting not to graze on public land. And I cannot leverage funds and expend those monies as a federal entity. And Mike with the Sublette County Conservation District is able to do that. And so everybody that came to the table brought an important resource or piece of the puzzle to the table. And we have a great group in Sublette County, and it's just, I'm proud to work with them. And we've been able to really have some major successes. And I would, you know, at any point, anytime, folks can contact, I can speak for the whole team, anybody on the team, to try to generate ideas that will work for you in your communities, wherever you happen to be. And so we're available, we're happy to help. And I would say, you know, don't overlook any of the partners that have potential to bring resources to the table. You know, in the first two fires, we really didn't use NRCS very much. Under the Farm Bill at the time of the Roosevelt, they had wiggle room for natural disaster in the Farm Bill. And so we were able to capitalize and utilize NRCS as a major partner during the Roosevelt restoration effort when we couldn't on Fontenelle and Cliff Creek. And so again, you know, the partnerships are amazing. Build those relationships now before the fire starts, and be able to, you know, bring that team together as you need to. And that's all I really have to add to everything folks have said. So.
Thank you so much, Chad. It's really good to hear the efforts that are put over in Sublette County and how well you guys all work together over there. It's encouraging, and thank you. Anne, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Hunter. Nice job. And thank you, Mike and Rob and all the panelists on the Wyoming showcase. I have to say, I got really excited with hearing how the partners all really come together and work really well together. Having grown up in a small community, I get it. And Wyoming seems to be that small community, even though it's a state boundary that I'm referring to. I definitely want to open this up to questions, so please put your questions in the chat. I have to actually say I have several things that I wanted to say to each of the speakers. I think y'all did a fabulous job. Kathy, you're absolutely right. I think the need for data to really show the assessment of what's at risk and what, you know, that will help prioritize and make decisions, help you make decisions about where you put the limited resources. When you talk about, you know, 8 firefighters in, you know, Jackson Hole, you know, and the numbers of people that come into those areas, that influx of people obviously comes with, you know, influx of, you know, problems. I'm sorry, a lot of good times, I'm sure. But the drivers are what really matters. And you did mention the insurance industry, and we're close to having an insurance speaker on our panel, but just couldn't pull that together with timing and people's schedules. So I really appreciated your comments on that. You also mentioned prescribed fire and great progress with public awareness. So if I can ask you a quick question, what about the areas in the conservation districts, you know, that also are on this in the western states? What would you recommend, Kathy, if you're still on how to make that change and make that public awareness, you know, better?
I think we need to do it very ground level, right? We've got to start at the bottom with all of this stuff. And unfortunately, you know, you all know, people pay attention when there's smoke in the air, which is when we're the busiest. You know, it's so frustrating because that's the best time to be getting that education. from that ground level. And I'm kind of surprised I haven't heard this phrase yet. It's like the big elephant in the room, right? We all sit down at the table together, which makes it way more fun to eat a big elephant, to have these partnerships and collaboration. And we eat it one little bite at a time. It's a big elephant, there's no question about it. But I think we've really got to work on our homeowners, and they're getting worked on by insurance companies. They're hearing the message from them. So keeping that in mind, I think we can help route our information and become more effective as they start to listen better.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I agree. You know, Oregon in like 2005, we held 3-4 wildfire and insurance summits. We had structural fire, wildland fire, and insurance agents and industry in the room, and we talked about it. At that time, years ago, it wasn't that big a deal. And now they're certainly listening a lot more and taking matters in their own hands to protect their policyholders. So I appreciated your comments on that. Very fabulous. I really, really appreciated your bringing up the state grants, and the network that you have there is really incredible. If you're still on, would you have any suggestions about how other conservation districts can access some of those grant opportunities?
I think a big part of it, Ann, is just making sure you're tied in with your state forestry representatives for the area, and that you are on their mailing list for when the grants come out. They all have pretty clear-cut application periods, and I know that, speaking for myself, I'm always willing to, if a conservation district is writing a grant for Western States WUI or CPPG, they want somebody else to get some eyes on it, or we handle a lot of them, so we can sometimes put in the little things that we know the committee's looking for. That's your main avenue, is just making sure you're in contact with your state forestry representative for the area. I know every state is set up different, so here it's district and ADF, and other places it might be a county forester or a fire management officer.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you mentioned the county forester, and one of the things I really have noticed over time is that there is a recognition that the county emergency manager get involved as well as the forester, if there is one for the county. And I think one of the things perhaps I see lacking is that we don't necessarily bring emergency management into the fold until after the event. Would you agree with that?
I think so. And there's again, that depends on state. Statutorily, especially in Wyoming, fire wardens, and there's a county fire warden for each county who isn't necessarily emergency management. They're our primary contact for wildland fire stuff. We have been doing better, I think, with getting emergency management on board, where we have them. It's and that opens up your FEMA grants, all that kind of stuff too, which we, in Wyoming, the state forester signs off on FEMA applications, but it does go through emergency management to get pushed up. So there are a lot of resources that we don't necessarily think of.
Right. I know in a lot of the fire planning I've done, we didn't ever think to invite the emergency manager. Just, it's a learning process, let me tell you. Thank you very much, Barry. Jill, the one thing I really, that you hit home with, I thought was, and it fits to Chris's question at the very beginning of who else fits in the equation, and you nailed it, it's like, look for creative solutions. Sometimes that creative solution, I would suspect, isn't necessarily going to come from the people that you talk with all the time. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Really thinking out of the box. We started to just look at everybody's challenge. Like, what is the challenge we're trying to overcome? And based on that unique challenge, trying to think of what solutions are out there. Give us, a list. Can we try this? Can we try this? And you wait until you get one that sticks. But yeah, absolutely. Looking at everything independently and individually is the way that you're going to have broad scale success.
Thank you very much. I agree. When you talk about people's strengths, you don't know what those are if you haven't developed that relationship early. So when you are in crisis mode, you automatically think, who am I going to call to help do that? If you don't know those people, you don't know that in your mind, that name isn't going to come to mind, or, so the more you can do to have those relationships early, I think, which was what Chad tied to, I think is really important. Don't want to skip over what Julie talked about. And Julie, I loved what you talked about with the invasive species. That is a continual issue. It is also damaging our landscapes. It's kind of the silent wildfire is the way I refer to it, because it's causing increased fire behavior. It puts our firefighters at increased risk. And like Katie said, a lot of firefighters and community members and communities are getting, being lost to wildfire. So Julie, where do you think we move the needle? What do we do to really get that recognition of invasive species impacts in communities?
Yeah, I think it's very important. And we hear more and more about invasive species fueled fires in the West, especially the Intermountain West these days. And it's hard to make, we've talked a lot about, from a variety of different speakers have talked about the need to engage with private landowners. And we try to do that a lot through our collaborative process here in Sublette County. But I think one of the benefits that I didn't quite get to is that through this process, with the rapport that we got by being on the ground with folks and just being out in the landscape with them, they started having more and more trust in government. And it starts probably the easiest with county-led government. Through our Weed and Pest and the Conservation District, they know we're members of the community. Then it kind of can go to the state level with our game and fish partners. And then eventually that trickles into more trust with our federal partners as well. And I think that was a big thing that we had success with that has led to many other projects and that have led to wildfire protection. We've talked about Joint Chiefs, and through our collaborative, we've been able to acquire Joint Chiefs funding for cheatgrass treatments on the forest. We were able recently to complete the Bridger Teton's EIS for weed management. And with that, the approval for aerial treatment, which we need. Any of you that have visited our area knows that it's quite, mountainous, and we needed to be able to have a helicopter to treat our cheatgrass. And it's been a huge asset to us to be able to manage weeds that are fuel for these fires. And we hear about it, a lot in Idaho and Utah, the catastrophic hundreds of thousands of acres burning, as with invasive species being the primary fuel. And we feel, and we've put a lot of focus on that in our area, to be able to limit those fuels, those fine fuel loads within our sagebrush rangelands, so that these fires can't carry through multiple plant landscapes, and putting emphasis on managing those invasive species. And it can be an invasive annual grass as our kind of the highlight right now, but it can be many other invasive species that fuel fires, and putting our interest and our money and our efforts into protecting our resilient and our resilient plant communities in our area, so that we can provide as much support to those on the ground fire efforts. We've had some smaller fires that have led to that, and we really see the benefit of that here, and trying to, as many people have said, kind of a grassroots. You have to get in contact with those small acreage people.
Right. Thank you very much. That's exactly the way I see it as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. And Chad, I'm not going to let you off the hook. You're with the Forest Service. I appreciate your representation of that agency today, and your words hit home to me as well. Fire will impact your community at some point. It will. And I can tell you, I lived on the wet side of Oregon, thinking that there wouldn't be a fire coming over, Mount Hood and down the corridors, but with 100-mile-an-hour wind for over 10 hours, guess what? It does impact areas that you would not think it would. And so I appreciate you being on today. I appreciate the comments about partnerships and the agreements that we have NACD with the Forest Service are very important to us and very important to the districts. And thank you for sharing what you did today with that. And we are at the time to take a quick break, and we are going to stop the recording, but